I still remember the exact second my parents decided I no longer belonged in my grandparents' house. They didn't yell. They didn't hesitate. They smiled. My sister stood between them, confident, already measuring the rooms with her eyes. "We fixed the paperwork," she said lightly. "The house is mine now. You're out by Friday." What they never bothered to ask was what I did right after my graduation. Quietly, legally, permanently. I didn't cry or argue. I just nodded, stepped aside, and let them leave, thinking they'd won. 2 days later, they came back with movers and learned why doors only look unlocked at first. My name is Sophia, and growing up, I learned early how to take up as little space as possible. In my family, love was never loud or warm. It was measured, counted, compared, and somehow, I always came up short. My younger sister didn't have to try. She was the golden child, the one my parents bent around without even realizing it. If she wanted something, it was framed as a need. If I wanted something, it was framed as a lesson in independence. I learned to nod, to wait, to swallow disappointment quietly. On the outside, we looked fine. Weekend dinners, holiday photos, a family that neighbors described as close. But inside our house, attention moved in one direction, and I learned to survive on leftovers. The only place that ever felt different was my grandparents' house. They lived in a small coastal town, the kind where the air always smelled faintly like salt and pine. Their house sat just far enough from the water that you could hear the waves at night, but still sleep. The porch boards creaked in familiar places. Wind chimes tapped softly when the breeze came in just right. When I was there, no one rushed me, no one compared me. My grandmother listened like every word mattered. My grandfather trusted me with small responsibilities at first, then bigger ones, grocery runs, appointments, later bills and payments when they started forgetting things. As they got older, I was the one who showed up consistently, not just for holidays or photos, but on ordinary days, the quiet ones. My parents and sister visited too, but mostly when it was convenient, mostly when something needed to be discussed. I didn't think much of it back then. I told myself families were complicated, that everyone showed love differently, that keeping the peace was worth the cost. By the time I finished school and walked across that graduation stage, my grandparents were gone. But that house still felt like the last place where I'd ever been fully seen. That's why when questions about the house started coming up again, they didn't sound innocent to me. They sounded familiar. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like ignoring that feeling anymore. At first, the questions came wrapped in concern. "So what are you planning to do with the house?" my mother asked one evening. Her voice casual, like she was asking about my weekend plans. She stirred her tea slowly, eyes fixed on the cup instead of me. "It's a lot of responsibility for one person," my father followed up days later. "Property taxes aren't cheap. Maintenance either. You don't want to get overwhelmed." My sister was more subtle. She stopped by unexpectedly, always with a reason that sounded harmless. Dropping off something mom forgot. Picking up a box she claimed was hers. Each time her gaze drifted over the shelves, the hallway, the small desk where I kept unimportant papers. At least unimportant to me. "You still have all the bills set up?" she asked once, smiling. "Utilities, payments, that kind of thing. I'm just curious." I told myself not to read into it, but the feeling in my stomach didn't listen. The comments kept coming, always framed as fairness, as family unity, as doing the right thing. It wouldn't be fair for one person to keep everything. Your grandparents would have wanted it shared. We're just trying to help you think long term. I'd heard this language before. It was the same tone my parents used whenever something needed to be taken from someone quietly. What finally cracked my denial wasn't a single comment. It was a memory. Years earlier, I'd watched my parents borrow money from a relative for something urgent. They promised to return it, then avoided the topic until the promise dissolved into silence. When the relative pushed back, she was labeled difficult, ungrateful, greedy. I remembered how quickly the story flipped. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying every recent conversation. The smiles, the timing, the sudden interest. It didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt like preparation. The next morning, I took a long lunch break and walked into a quiet office downtown. A lawyer who specialized in estates and trusts listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The history, the house, the questions that wouldn't stop. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and said something that settled deep in my chest. If your family believes they're entitled to this property, waiting will only make it easier for them. He explained my options calmly, clearly. What could be protected, what couldn't. What happened when people acted first and asked questions later. I didn't hesitate. By the time I walked back into the sunlight, I knew something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't warn my sister. I didn't change my tone or my routines. I let them believe what they wanted, that I was still the same quiet, accommodating person they'd always known. Because if they thought I was standing still, they'd move closer. And that was exactly where I needed them to be. The paperwork didn't feel dramatic. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no speeches about justice. Just signatures, dates, and a steady explanation of what each page meant and why it mattered. An irrevocable trust isn't something you rush into. It's slow by design, careful. Once it's done, it can't be undone on a whim. And that was the point. The house, the remaining accounts, everything my grandparents had worked for was placed somewhere it couldn't be reinterpreted later. I listened more than I spoke. I asked questions. I took notes. And when it was finished, I walked out with a thin folder that didn't look powerful at all, even though it was. After that, I went back to my life like nothing had changed. I still showed up to work on time. I still answered my parents' calls. I still smiled at my sister when she stopped by with that same casual confidence like she was already halfway moved in. They mistook my calm for uncertainty. Dinner invitations became more frequent. Conversations turned warmer, almost nostalgic. My mother talked about family traditions. My father mentioned how nice it would be if everyone could come together again. My sister joked about renovations she'd do if the house were ever hers, watching my face closely when she said it. I gave them nothing, no arguments, no reassurances, no promises, just enough politeness to keep things smooth. Behind the scenes, I was documenting everything. Dates, messages, the way questions were asked, the way assumptions were made. I didn't need to confront them. I just needed to be ready if they crossed the line. And eventually, they did. The first hint came in the form of urgency. My mother called one afternoon, her voice tight with what sounded like concern, but carried something sharper underneath. "We need to talk soon," she said, "about the house. It can't wait." Then my sister texted short, confident. "We'll come by this weekend. It's easier to explain in person." I didn't ask what needed explaining. By then, I knew exactly what they were planning. They believed silence meant weakness, that hesitation meant fear, that because I'd always step back before I would do it again. They thought the story would end the same way it always had. I let them believe that. When they finally showed up smiling too much, standing a little too close together, I recognized the look on their faces. It was the look of people who think the decision has already been made. They spoke carefully at first, then more boldly, and finally with certainty. They thought they were delivering a verdict. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct them. I didn't even raise my voice. I just listened. Because by the time they finished explaining what they believe was already done, the real outcome had been sealed weeks ago, and they had no idea how close they were to finding out. They came on a gray morning, the kind where the ocean looks flat and quiet like it's holding its breath. I was on the porch when their car pulled into the gravel drive. I remember noticing small things first, the crunch of tires, the way my sister stepped out before anyone else, already smiling. My parents followed, standing close together, shoulders squared like they'd rehearsed this moment. My sister didn't waste time. "We got everything. Sorted," she said, holding up a stack of papers. "The house is in my name now. We figured it's cleaner that way." She tilted her head slightly. "You'll need to be out by Friday." My mother nodded eyes, soft voice calm. "It's not personal, sweetheart. It's just what makes sense for the family," my father added. "You have your own life in the city. This place needs someone who can really manage it." They were smiling, all of them, like they were doing me a favor. I looked at the papers without reaching for them. The seals looked official at a glance. Blue ink, crisp edges, confidence printed into every page. They believed this was over. I felt a strange stillness settle over me. Not fear, not anger, just clarity. Okay, I said. That word seemed to relax them. My sister exhaled already victorious. My mother's shoulders dropped like she'd been carrying something heavy. They mistook my calm for surrender. I stepped aside so they could leave my sister brushing past me with a satisfied grin. We'll be back soon, she said. Probably with movers. It's easier if we handle it all at once. I nodded. I even smiled. 2 days later, they returned. This time, they brought a moving truck. I watched from inside as it pulled up behind their car, white and loud against the muted sky. 2 movers jumped out stretching, already glancing toward the house, like it was just another job on the schedule. My parents looked energized. My sister was practically glowing. This will go fast, she said, clapping her hands once. We'll have you out before lunch. I stepped onto the porch, but I wasn't alone. Standing beside me was a man they didn't recognize. Middle-aged, neatly dressed, calm in the way people get when they're about to say something final. He held a folder under one arm, thick and unmistakably official. The moment stretched. The movers slowed first. One of them stopped mid-step, sensing the shift. My sister's smile faltered. My parents exchanged a look. The man stepped forward slightly and spoke before anyone else could. I need to confirm who I'm speaking with, he said evenly. He listed their names without hesitation. I'm here regarding the legal status of this property. My father frowned. Who are you? The man opened the folder just enough for them to see the documents inside. I represent the local property records office. This house was transferred into an irrevocable trust several weeks ago. Miss Sophia is the sole trustee. Silence crashed down hard. My sister laughed sharp and nervous. That's not possible. We have paperwork. He nodded. I've seen it. My mother stepped forward. There must be a mistake. We corrected an error in the will. There was no error, he said calmly. And any attempt to change ownership without authorization from the trustee is legally void. My sister's face drained of color. That doesn't make sense, she said quickly. The documents were filed. Everything was done properly. The man flipped a page in his folder. The filings were made through an unverified service. The notary information does not match state records. That alone is enough to invalidate the transfer. One of the movers cleared his throat. So, should we wait? No, the man said, not taking his eyes off my family. You should not proceed. My father's voice hardened. Are you accusing us of something? I'm stating facts, he replied. If there are further attempts to take possession of this property, it could escalate into a legal matter. My sister turned to me then, eyes wide. You did this? I met her gaze evenly. I protected what wasn't yours to take. My mother's voice cracked. How could you do this to us after everything we've done for you? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step forward. You showed up with movers, I said quietly. You told me I was out by Friday. You didn't ask. You decided. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. The confidence he'd walked in with was gone, replaced by something brittle. The man handed my father a copy of the notice. This documents today's attempted transfer and serves as a formal warning. The movers were already backing away, murmuring apologies. One of them climbed back into the truck without waiting for instructions. My sister stood frozen papers limp in her hand. This isn't over, she said weakly. I nodded once. That part is up to you. They didn't argue anymore. They didn't threaten. They didn't plead. They just left. I watched their car disappear down the road, the moving truck following close behind gravel, settling slowly back into place. The man beside me closed his folder. They'll think twice before trying that again. I thanked him, watched him drive away, then stood alone on the porch. The ocean hadn't changed. The wind hadn't changed. But something inside me had. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for what they might take next. I was standing exactly where I belonged. The fallout didn't explode. It collapsed. There were no more surprise visits. No more cheerful check-ins disguised as concern. The messages stopped first, then the calls. A week later, a formal notice arrived through their attorney brief and stiff withdrawing every claim connected to the house and requesting no further contact. I read it once and filed it away without ceremony. Word traveled quietly after that. Relatives who had once repeated half-formed stories reached out with awkward apologies. Others stayed silent. I didn't chase either reaction. I wasn't interested in rebuilding bridges that had only ever led one way. What mattered was that the noise finally faded. I returned to the coastal house on a Sunday afternoon, parked where my grandparents always had, and unlocked the door slowly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old wood and the lavender sachets my grandmother tucked into drawers years ago. Sunlight slid across the floor just like it always had. I walked through each room without rushing. No tension in my shoulders. No need to listen for footsteps behind me. The truss did its job. The records were clean. The line was clear. For the first time, I understood what safety actually felt like. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of boundaries that held. I made tea, sat on the porch, and watched the tide move in and out. The house didn't feel like a prize I'd defended anymore. It felt like a promise I'd kept. That night, I stood on the porch as the sky darkened, the waves steady and unbothered, just like the house had always been. For the first time, I wasn't holding my breath around people who called themselves family. I wasn't shrinking to keep the peace. I'd learned something my grandparents understood all along. Protecting yourself isn't cruelty. It's survival. If you've ever had to draw a line with the people who should have protected you, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the next.